Good evening and welcome to the second lecture in the 2012-13 Building Ecology, Science and Technology lecture series, sponsored by Tremco Roofing and Building Maintenance. My name is Ted Kesik, and I'm a professor here at Daniels, and it's my privilege to coordinate this lecture series. For those of you who wish to obtain a certificate recognizing the two continuing education learning hours under the OAA program for the 2012-2014 cycle, please fill out one of these registration forms up here at the front and drop it off on the other pile, which is on the left side. And please don't rush up here during the lecture to get your form. You can do it at the end of the lecture, just to let you know. And if you do that, a digital certificate will be emailed to the address you provide on the form, and that's provided you print clearly and remember your email address. Because sometimes I forget mine, or I mix them up because I have too many. Anyway, some people have already come to me and said, well, where's the digital certificate from last week's lecture? Well, you know, you have to understand that there's professional practice time and there's academic time. And in the world of academic time, we plan to get these things to you before Christmas. We promise that you'll get them before Christmas, but it does take time to process them because each certificate is handcrafted. These are very unique, and there's something that you'll be able to pass on to succeeding generations as proof of the fact that you've participated in this lecture series. That's how much we appreciate you're taking time out of your busy lives to attend the lecture series. At this time, I'd like to invite Paul Sheehy, who's Vice President North America of Tremco Roofing and Maintenance, to welcome everyone. Paul?
Thank you, Ted. Very quickly, on behalf of Tremco, I'd like to welcome you all here today and say it's been a distinct honor on behalf of Tremco Roofing and Building Maintenance to be associated with this lecture series now in its fourth year, and to be associated in general with the University of Toronto and the GRIT Lab, the Green Roof Innovation Laboratory, which is up top. And I know you're not here to hear me, you're just here to hear Laura. Let me give you a little small commercial. There's very few manufacturers left. We're in Leaside. We have 411,000 square feet over about 11 acres, and we're a zero landfill facility, so we're very proud of that. And when you talk about what we manufacture, I think we're the only zero landfill construction materials manufacturer in North America, although I'm not 100% sure of that one, so I don't want to be sued, but we're certainly the only one in Ontario. So if anybody anytime would like to have a tour, just look me up. We'll see you at the Wine and Cheese after. So thank you on behalf of Tremco, and enjoy the evening.
Thanks, Paul. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight's lecture, Laura Solano. I know that most of you have probably read the poster, and so you have her background, but I had the great fun of taking Laura out for lunch today and talking to her, and what I'll tell you about her, and you'll gather this from the lecture, she's what I call a hybrid ecologist and landscape architect who views technology as a tremendous opportunity. In other words, not something to be feared, but in fact something to be welcomed and to be integrated into making the world a better place. And for that reason, I'm very pleased and hope that you'll also welcome along with me Laura Solano.
Thanks for coming. You know, Ted, when you gave that introduction and you were talking about lunch, I thought you were going to reveal 45 minutes of our conversation, which was really about politics. So we're on the same page. So tonight I wanted to talk about drainage in particular as it relates to both performance in the landscape and how one experiences the landscape, because I don't think that those can be separated. Thank God we're in a time in the profession where really the two are, you know, can be beautifully married together. But I think that it kind of speaks to the fact that really what we're making these days in many landscapes are working landscapes. where the emphasis is really on performance and sustainability is a byproduct. You know, we're kind of stuck with the term sustainability, but it, you know, for landscapes, it doesn't really express how dynamic they are. So I prefer to think about it as performance, which is something that you can check up on from the moment that a landscape is installed and, you know, until forever. But the other kind of sustainability, which comes in the experience portion of this, is the cultural and social sustainability, because it's not enough just to have a working landscape. It has to work in other ways. It has to contribute to society. It has to elevate people's place in the world. So in that way, it's a much different kind of work, but just as hard. So I have 10 projects to show you tonight, and I'm going to try to go through them quickly, but 3 of them are a little bit longer, and then kind of give you a sushi menu of a bunch of other projects. So the first projects are kind of a pair, Millrace Park and Allegheny Riverfront, both done in the early 90s or finished in the 90s. This is Millrace Park, a fairly recent photograph of it. I bring it up because this was the first major project that the firm undertook, and the reason it was so challenging is that it floods. And I realized as I was preparing for this lecture that in those days, one really didn't think about water the way that we think about it now. Water was something that basically happened to your project, and you had to assume a position of defensiveness. In other words, you had to make sure that you could get all the silt off of the ground that was left. You had to make sure your light poles could withstand, you know, raging waters. And then the next large project we had was Allegheny Riverfront in Pittsburgh, and it too had this characteristic. So we were starting to see a trend in our work, and really I have to say that it was with Allegheny that things kind of came alive for us in terms of how you work with a site in the condition that it's handed to you, and how you can start to use those aspects to not control the landscape, but manage it in a way that it can start to respond to the conditions that you're given. So the first project is Alumni Valley at Wellesley College, by now a mature landscape. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and it's really doing quite beautifully, thanks mainly to Wellesley's great perseverance in maintenance. But Wellesley is a really fascinating college in the sense that it was started in the late 1800s, and unlike many other colleges at that time, it really took the stance of looking at its geology and its physical history and plan the campus around that. And as opposed to someplace like the University of Virginia and many other campuses at the time that were still on, you know, the classical arrangement of an institution. And so for Wellesley, that was pretty advanced for the time. But the person that kind of directed them was Olmsted Jr., who did a master plan for them and kind of identified that there were hills and valleys that they needed to respect. And his basic view was build on the high, preserve the low or the valleys for recreation, study, enjoyment, relaxation. So if you look at this diagram, all of these dark green are all valley, and those were preserved over the years. But as the automobile had pressure on the campus, this valley, which is right next to Lake Waban, was turned into a parking lot. And there it sat until we did the 1998 master plan and suggested that that valley be restored. One of the primary reasons was that it would restore that connection, an important connection to Lake Waban. So there's the project. It quickly became a very complex project. It started out as a project that would basically help with the watershed on the campus and take drainage and kind of distill it as it went down to Lake Waban, because Lake Waban was in a lot of trouble. There were barely any fish in there, and that was because of pollutants and water that was coming off of the campus that wasn't cleansed. And so we came up with a system of a way to cleanse the water. So it's coming down from this watershed. Here's Lake Waban. This is our area, so we're basically taking an awful lot of water. So this is what we affected, but we're taking all of this water. Almost half of the campus is coming down through this throat. So what we did was to create a series of devices where water would come to areas like this forebay and then make its way down a very long swale, go into a basin that would settle out, and then go into Lake Waban. Likewise, all the water that would come from the center of the campus would go into this marsh feeder pond. It would slowly make its way into the cattail marsh over the same spillway and then out to Lake Waban. So the idea was to delay water and to allow it to be remediated by the plants, as well as just slow things down, because Lake Waban was being so taxed. And these are some of the devices that we used. This is the forebay that I spoke about. This is a sediment forebay, and all of this stone was unearthed as we were doing excavation on the site, so it was a great opportunity to reuse that material. So this is the spillway where both the marsh feeder pond and that long swale kind of meet. They go over these stones and get aerated. The water gets aerated before it goes back into the lake. So here is the cattail marsh and the feeder pond. So basically water is coming down through swales and also coming down to this area. It's settling here, solids are settled here, and then you have to clean that out every once in a while. But water is slowly released down here and then goes out to Lake Waban. But of course it requires a lot of engineering to make all of this happen. But one of the things that these devices were used for was not just to do the hard work of cleansing the water, but also to add a level of intimacy and use, so that, for instance, this is at the base of the forebay. So there are rocks that are just kind of loosely tumbled there, and in dry times people can go and sit. You can also get to the water's edge and hear the bullfrogs, so kids tend to go there. But the project really started as a complementary project to a campus center that was designed by Max Gauguin and Merrill Elam, fantastic architects. So this was a separate project. This was actually a site that we identified in the master plan as where the campus center should go, and it was right at the head of the valley that we were restoring. But we discovered about halfway through design that we had a problem. We had contaminated soils. A geotechnical report was done. We had contaminated soils, and we couldn't take any soils off site. So we also had to take all of the soil from the excavation of the building. And so the mounds that you see around the site are really as a result of having all of that extra fill that was too expensive to take off, irresponsible to take off, or was contaminated and couldn't be taken off. So what we did is, this is the original grade. Because we had contaminated layers, we basically capped the site 3 feet and then put another 3 feet on top of that, simply to lose the amount of fill that had to stay on site. And then the mounds that resulted are really from using that additional fill. So you can see that the mounds, which were a response to a problem with soils, actually contribute quite a bit to the experience of the project. So there are both flat areas like this for recreation, and then the mounds, which are covered in wildflower meadows and prairies. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. Back in 2007, the office took on looking at a master plan for the lower Don. Specifically, the project was to try to remediate the mouth of the Don, which over the years had really caused some pretty bad flooding problems. And in fact, if you look at the area historically, this used to be a marsh. So here is the Don River coming down, and it was, of course, just as nature wants, going out and through the marsh, getting kind of cleansed, slowing down, and then being released into the harbor. But progress kind of changed that. And interestingly, once the industrialization of that area started to occur, people were still, as we are today, interested in going to the water's edge. And in fact, they still wanted that experience. And so they would, cross these incredible derelict lands, in their Sunday best just to get down to the water. And it's important when you're looking at these kinds of intensive projects that you really look beyond the boundaries of your site. So one of the things we did was to kind of look at how water and the network along the Don River Valley worked and how it would contribute to the work that had to be done at the mouth. This is one of the first things that we uncovered. It doesn't take a genius to see that when you channel a river that does this into this, you're probably going to have some problems along the way, because imagine stretching this out into one long string. It's probably 2 or 3 times the length that we're seeing in the channeled Don River. And in addition to that stroke of genius to channel the Don River, the population in the area has just grown tremendously. So if you look at the impervious coverage just from 1990 to 15 years later, it's unbelievable. You guys are building like crazy. So one of the first things we did was to work with our hydrologist. And by the way, I'm showing you these projects and taking full credit for them. But in fact, of course, every one of these has a huge team members behind it. And so don't think that we're just so brilliant. We figured it all out ourselves. In fact, we rely a lot on sub-consultants to really help us figure these things out. So this is a model of the existing conditions of that. So this is basically the project site. Here is the Don River coming down, and you can see the extent of flooding that happens, because basically the Don River right now goes up into the banks, and then when it spills out in this narrow opening, it basically spills all over the land. This is the direction that we wanted to take it, where instead of having to take this sharp turn, which is not exactly how water wants to flow, instead we looked at a more naturalized mouth that would allow flow that would go in the direction that it would prefer to go, that it would go by itself if left unencumbered. So this is the diagram that basically got us going on how we would handle this problem, which is the thought that if we're gonna let the Don River change its behavior at the mouth, then we have to allow it more than one way for it to get out, other than the narrow Keating channel. So in fact, we started to look at those models that I showed you before and decided that we needed to have more than one way to get out. And not only that, but in the secondary route, there needed to be yet another spillway to help things along. But all of this comes with a lot of accessories, of course. So it's not just a matter of saying, okay, we're going to carve out the land and let the water go where it wants to go. It still is a pretty formidable force. And so a series of things like levees and thinking about where you put the ice when it comes down the Don, and what are the channeling, dewatering devices, where do you put the ships, where do you put the boats. And so all of this came into play, and as you can see, there's really quite a bit of infrastructure that has to be done in order for this to work. And the trick is, of course, how do you use that infrastructure to add to the project itself? These are some of the models that were done if we took the approach that we were talking about. So you keep the Keating open, and then you allow a spillway and you allow a diversion. So I'll flip through this and pay attention to the percentages. And what you're really looking at is this is 0% in a 2-year event. So 78% of the water goes there, and 100% goes out there, 22%. So you start to see how it changes. So that's a 10-year event, a 25-year event. So it's not until the 25-year event that water starts to go over the spillway. And then at a 100-year event, you have 8%, and more water goes into the Keating channel. And then this is a regulatory event, and you can see the numbers are really quite different. Now half of the water goes into the Keating, half of the water goes in this direction, and then between those two, they're split up. So in coming up with this technological solution, looking at the hydrology of the site, it starts to help form how the site is going to be organized. And one of the benefits of splitting up the flow is that you create much more waterfront, right? So you have the Keating channel left intact, but now you've got this flow, and so instead of one piece of land with water on the perimeter, now you have a lot more potential to have more people face the water and a chance for people to actually interact with that water. And so you start to come up with different diagrams whereby the prime real estate isn't at the edge, it's actually in the center, just as much as it is at the edges. Don't squint too hard to read this, but basically we did comparisons of what the current Portland's proposal was and what would happen to these various categories in the planned improvements and then the improvements that we were talking about. And so what you see is that in every case, you basically increase the amount of water area or the development fronting an open space. And so by making that split, you actually improve the quality of life for the residents in that area. The only thing that you actually decrease is, oh, wait a minute, may not be on here. Oh, community development area actually decreases, but the way that happens is the numbers are kept up by increasing the density. So you're trading buildings for for landscape. What this does when you suddenly have, you know, twice as much waterfront is when you're looking at the design, suddenly there are many opportunities for different and varying landscape conditions. So you start to look at hard edges, soft edges, you know, what happens when you go underneath, you know, what happens at the Keating Channel if you're going to leave it basically as it is, what happens when you go underneath bridges. So you start to come up with a whole series of landscapes that were never possible before, and increase the, you know, the versatility of the entire complex. And, you know, things like how does public transportation work? How do you approach the water from the Keating Channel? And then, of course, all of this green space that we've made has to be thought of in a very different way. It has to be compatible with the forces of the river. We're just finishing up the Bush Library in Dallas, Texas. In fact, I was there yesterday. It was chilly. It's like what it is here. This project is on Southern Methodist University campus, which is the alma mater of Laura Bush. And it's a pretty horrible site, quite frankly. It's about 25 acres or so. It's hemmed in by the North Central Expressway, which is about 20 feet below it, and all of the sound comes bouncing up. You have parking garages and athletic facilities next to it, so kind of faceless buildings. There's residential who, frankly, don't want you to be there at all. So it's, you know, it's not a happy beginning. And then this is the site that we inherited. Pretty desolate. It used to have military housing on it after World War II. It was just disabused over the years. This is what we wanted to make. So what we did is we traveled around Texas to see what the native landscapes were like. And one of the things that we kept coming back to time and time again was the Blackland Prairies. They're incredibly beautiful, quite diverse. Everybody thinks of the prairies as being flat, but in fact we discovered that there's quite a bit of topography in them. So this is the view, and then we had to do all sorts of studies to figure out what would be the various ecologies of these savannas and the woodlands, and so we prepared boards like this. And I should take a moment and say that Laura Bush was fantastic. At the Crawford Ranch, she has completely restored their prairie. She is no dummy about this stuff. You just don't get anything past her. But I can say that she was really the prime force in deciding that she wanted the full 25 acres. She negotiated hard with SMU to get the full site because originally they were offering them half of it. And she also decided that when they put in this landscape that it would be open to the public. And she, you know, she really lobbied hard for all of that. So we would prepare these boards and go over things with her, and she'd say yes, no, maybe so. But the idea, you know, started very simply. The building is by Robert A.M. Stern. And once again, an architect handing us a lot of fill, 70,000 cubic yards of excavation from this building that covers 4 acres in its footprint. It is huge. And so we had to, again, keep all of that material on site. It was too expensive to take off. And so this is an early study model where, you know, we started to think about the building having a plinth or the Great Lawn, and then how we would have water move through the site. So these are bioswales, something called the seep, another bioswale, prairies covering all the hillsides, and then everything draining down to a wet prairie, and then a wildflower meadow on the highs as well. So these are diagrams that we do early on to kind of study how things are going to work, and not as well as explain things to our client I was talking with students earlier and saying, you know, when you have really complex ideas, you need to try to make them as attractive and as clear to clients as you possibly can. And so you get into these quasi-technical and illustrative plans. So this is the advancement of the design. There's the great lawn that forms that plinth in front of the building. Here's the bioswales that go along. That's the seep. And then this is the wet prairie. And so if you look at how the water is channeled, one of the things, because there are droughts in Texas all the time, one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that we could capture as much water as possible to irrigate the landscape. So basically the way that it works is here's the building. There are parking areas up top. The parking areas are divided, so this parking area actually goes into bioswales, is piped underground, goes into an irrigation tank here. That overflow is then directed to another irrigation tank under the wet prairie. Likewise, with all of the topography, water is coming off, going into those seeps and swales, and ending up in the wet prairie. So this is the low point on the entire site. Likewise, on this side of the parking lot, all of this water is collected through the bioswales, goes down and is connected and is exposed in 4 bays that then continue on down seeps and swales down to that area. So absolutely everything is going to the storage tanks. We are going to store about 300,000 gallons of water. And then, again, a board that we prepare so people understand. So this is the stormwater cistern that's going to be here and here. We talk about ways that we might have the natural landscape work with people using the site. This is a picture last summer of the project, so you can start to see some of those devices showing up. So here's the parking areas up here. All that water is coming down into something called the seep, which is there, goes down underneath bridges, and then ends up in the wet prairie. Likewise, this side comes down, is revealed in this 4 bay, and then again comes down into the wet prairie. One of the things that we were faced with is that we had absolutely no soil on site. That soil that you saw was full of rubble. We used it, but we couldn't use it as topsoil. So one of the things we had to do was to bring on design soils. And one of the ways that those affected the hydrology on the site is that we also use those to absorb water so that it would go underground. In other words, not everything was overland flow, but in fact the soils were designed to be permeable enough so that they could take water and hold it for the plants. So we're not just relying on irrigation, we're also talking about holding as much water as we can. And then, quite frankly, when you install design soils, they're devoid of some biology, so you have to introduce that, so we had a program for that. And then this is the seep. So we did study models of it, really crude study models of them. And then this is the seep being built. And the way that the seep works is that cistern that was the first cistern basically releases water. And when it releases water, it goes into a gravel lens behind this seep. It seeps out of the wall slowly and then goes down into a swale. So this is looking at building that gravel lens behind. This is in progress, and then this is just the other day. So we're making our way there. And again, it's designed in such a way that you can get down into these areas. There are times when this is flowing full, but when it's not, you can really get down in there and kind of explore that area. This is bluebonnets. So we're going to have an entire field. This is this is like fall color for people in Texas. Basically, every spring, people line up in their cars and go hunt for big bluebonnet fields. So we're going to do that. But some other devices, just to look at quickly, were these are the bioswales up in the parking area. Some of the swales that are at the toes of slope. This is something called a check dam, so it's just basically stones, and you can see there's a different species of plants that can take that water. This is that same area flowing full, so this check dam is this check dam. So this is what happens, and then it slowly seeps through some stones. So the forebay, again, studied in model, changed our mind a little bit, and instead of it being a wall, ended up being this splayed back device. But one of the way that these work is that these are the swales, so water is coming from here, going into a swale that eventually goes down into the storage tank. But to slow this water down, there's a series of stones that have gaps between them. So the water flows between the gaps, and then you can sit on the deck and put your feet on, the stone, or you can go down to the next layer. But it's a way for people to be able to get close to what's happening, to the forces and the dynamics of it. And that was very early morning yesterday. So I'm going to talk about a series of projects. We've been looking at stormwater control for a long time. This is the Herman Miller production plant in Georgia. And the basic idea here is it's a production plant. They have a need for a huge amount of parking for their staff, just the factory workers. So this would be, here's the factory and here's the traditional way of looking at the parking lot, and then you might even have a deep retention pond. So we suggested that, in fact, what we should do is take this and kind of intersperse it through the parking so that you basically break down the amount of overflow that's coming into a retention pond and slowly release it into shallow wetlands that then go out into the adjacent creek. So you can see this is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and there's no such thing as storm drainage to connect into. The only place that you can drain into are the stream corridors. So these green is the series of wetlands. So here's the parking area. You can see it comes down, so it flows into this area. There's a connection underneath here. They also flow at different points into that stream corridor. So you're basically creating a series of wetlands. You're taking as much water as you can, the roof runoff, parking lots, under drains from the buildings, and you're taking them through this series of wetlands that then slowly releases, right? The trick for this is that you don't want to dump a lot of water into an existing system because you'll overburden it and create other disasters, change the ecology, etc. So this way you're creating new ecologies as well as preserving ones that already exist. So this is the parking lot after working hours. So basically you can see the wetlands in between, and then beyond are meadows that were created to look back up. And then they do have a retention pond, but it's on the other side of the building, and it basically holds water that comes from that side, but that water eventually gets released into that stream as well. So that's looking at it from the same pond from the other direction. Lake Whitney Water Treatment Plant was a project we worked on with Stephen Hull's office. It's basically a water treatment plant that's almost entirely built into the hillside. It's an amazing building. And we created, again, this was a flat site. There was an old water treatment plant on here. By the way, this is the Eli Whitney house, which is why this is called Lake Whitney. And here's the building. I'm giving you a little glimpse. It's now, for security reasons, nobody can get into that building who isn't supposed to be there. So there's your treat to see the inside of that. And then the green roofs that I pointed out before. But really, the real work of this was the idea of what happens from raindrop to faucet. So we wanted people to understand what happens with water. And again, we had a lot of excavation from the building. So again, up come the mounds. So basically, in every direction, you're collecting water and directing it to wetlands that we created that then slowly seep out into the existing wetlands. But in order to do this, a lot of engineering, of course, has to take place at the edges of these wetlands. So you start to see things like choir logs, slope stabilization, hydric soils to hold water. It starts to become this very complicated, but at the same time, necessary system to make sure that everything is going to function properly. So these are that same body of water over the seasons. But there's also, the upland areas that do contribute to that water system. So this is a swale at the toe of the slope. And one of the things that we often get involved in is how our landscapes are going to be maintained. We consider that a lot because I have to tell you that that's one of the biggest heartaches for landscape architects is how is your project going to be maintained? You have this vision, and yet you've got this dynamic landscape, and whoever takes care of it has just as much power as you. So we decided to make shorter grasses in the swales that could be mowed by maintenance people and would also help to keep the water flowing because they're lower grasses, and then meadows and wildflowers on the slopes. This is a project of ours that rarely gets any kind of promo. It's a project in Boston. This is it. It's called North Point. And it's a project that was one of those large brownfield areas where a developer decided that over 25 years they would develop the property with a number of buildings. But one of the first things they decided to do was kind of reach back to the 19th century and build an amenity first. So they asked us if we would design a 7-acre park. And that was the good news. The bad news is that they only had $500,000 to do 7 acres. Do the math, it's not much. So when we first got the plans, one of the things we noticed, a civil engineer had been there before us, is that there was $1 million in infrastructure, piping, catch basins, et cetera. And so we said to them, look, let's get rid of most of that. We're going to need some of it, but let's get rid of most of it. And if we do, and we can do it successfully, can we have that money for the landscape? And they said, have at it. So basically, what was created is again another wetland. And one of the devices that we used was there was quite a bit of stone on the site. These big piles that were taken up in excavation. So kind of looking to Richard Long and how those pieces would go together, as well as existing slopes on the Charles River. We started to look at how we could use that stone around the site. And so these are various devices. So the way that we got rid of the infrastructure is that there are swales all over the site that fill during stormwater events, eventually fill up here and then flow over into the wetland over there. But you can start to see the different ways that we use stone that we found around the site. So basically this is a swale that fills up to that level and is conveyed to another area just like this. So there's the installation of the stone. Took a lot of sorting, but definitely worth it. And then the end result of that. They did build 3 of the buildings, and they've done really well. In fact, the developer told us that they always have trouble selling ground floor units, and that those were the first units that went when they put them up for sale. So the park did its work. Tried to show you mostly built projects, but here's one that I thought you would be interested in. So remember Mill Race Park? So there's Mill Race Park. We're back in Columbus, Indiana. And someone approached us and said we want to do a water sports complex, like water ski, jet skis, etc. And there was this very large piece of land off of the river that they had purchased. They didn't even ask us. They purchased it and asked us to come up with some ideas. And so the idea was to create these long ponds that you could do, jet skiing, etc. And then use the water from the existing river, because you're certainly not going to fill up these with potable water. So it's a matter of working with regulators to be able to divert some of that water through a wetland so that it gets cleansed, so you're not getting a lot of sediment, and then basically channeling the water through and then re-releasing it up on that fork of the river. It also helps in ameliorating some of that drainage issues that we saw before. Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is a long-term project for us, started in 2003. It's basically looking at turning this entire docklands into public park. And this is, just to put you in context, this is Brooklyn Heights and, of course, Lower Manhattan, the Brooklyn Bridge, and the BQE. And this is incredibly derelict land, and yet at the same time, all of the infrastructure was in perfect shape because it got renovated just before they stopped bringing boats here because the draft to the water just wasn't deep enough. And so there are all sorts of mysterious businesses in here. Like you go inside, they're like a speakeasy. It's just so bizarre. Some of these people just, their skin's practically transparent because they spend all their time indoors. So a lot of tough conditions, right? These old buildings. You can see the water has really been disabused in some areas. And this is phase 1. There are actually 5 different phases. We've done 2 of them. This is Pier 1, and we've also done Pier 6. And the idea is that you build from each ends. You do bookends that go to different neighborhoods, and you work your way in. And so we're now on the 3rd phase of work. But I just wanted to talk about this area. So, this is the first site we built on because of the prime real estate that it is. Plus, it was the only piece that was on solid land. Everything else was on piers. And so it was actually the easiest to construct as well. So this is the pier. So this is on terra firma. And this place just gets used unbelievably. One of the things about New Yorkers that I've always admired is that they really know how to use their landscapes and their open space, and they use them well and often. But when we were looking at how the drainage might work on this pier, one of the things we did was kind of analyze for ourselves, how does it typically work? How does drainage typically work on a New York City street? And then came up with a different way to think about how we might collect water for irrigation and how we might also use on-site treatment swales to cleanse that water before it goes into the collection system. There is going to be some development on the site, quite controversial actually, but it is going to be done, and we'll take all the water that we can get from anywhere. So this is that diagram. Here is the East River, right? So the Brooklyn Bridge is over here. And again, through a series of underdrains and swales, all of the water is collected in these. They're not tanks, but they're actually giant underground pipes that store the water and then slowly release it, either for irrigation or back into the water after it's been cleansed. So this is a series of ponds that were created, wetland ponds, that eventually lead out into the bay, but it's cleansing all of the water that's coming off of slopes. And that's what those look like. So here's one of the wetlands. There's a bridge over it. This is looking from the lawn to the wetlands below. And then there are paths created. So this is where that wetland kind of outfalls into the water. So it moves through these plants and then is slowly seeped out in that wall. And again, by using this, the infrastructure and revealing it, people are able to use it for pleasure. You know, to take a walk, to sit and look at, you know, the most fantastic view of New York that, you know, can be had in the area. And there are ways to get down. You can take a kayak down to the river. You know, we left things like this in place, all of these piers, simply because, you know, we thought they were interesting and it costs a lot of money to take them out. And then the last project, some of you may be familiar with this, Don River Park. We've been working in Toronto since 2005. This was actually our first job here, and working with Waterfront Toronto. And again, you know, we seem to get all the nice sites somehow. So again, here's the Don River. And some of you may not know that in the West Donlands, basically they're going to develop all of this property. But in order to do that, a project called the Flood Protection Landform had to be built. In other words, we talked about the flooding of the Don River, and it flooded so badly that in fact water would come up into this area and make all of these sites virtually undevelopable. So a flood protection landform was built so that it basically allows the water to splay out and not spill out over into the community. And there was a decision made that on top of that landform, a park would be made. And so we were fortunate enough to be selected for that. There are also some accessory areas like River Square. So this was the beginning of construction. And the idea was basically, here's some sketches to kind of convey those ideas, but the idea is really simple. So here is that crest, right? So the Don River basically can flow up to about that elevation or so safely. So cross-sectionally, this is all going downhill. There's the railroad tracks. And so we created 8 acres of prairies for land that all faces the Don River, but in this green area is a city park, what's going to be a city park, and it's organized very simply. There's a central lawn for passive recreation. There are more regulatory recreation fields, and there's this mound that is very active. There's a play area, there's a water play area, and then on this side there's an urban marsh and topography that surrounds it. This is that active hill. There's a pavilion there. This is by Mary Ann Thompson Architects, and this is the play area in front of it. It has water play area, so it has water coming out of fountain heads. And then this is the other side of the equation, which is the marsh area. These were taken last summer as we're finishing up the park. It'll be done in the spring, I hope. So boardwalk that goes over the marsh area, lots of stone to kind of hold in the slopes, as well as create habitat areas for the critters we hope will show up. And then just a quick series of diagrams to show how this actually works, because this was a very unusual problem of how to maintain the marsh in a healthy state, as well as provide irrigation, collect as much stormwater as we could before it goes into the city system. So here's the basic diagram. So there's that central lawn. Here's the play hill and water play area, the marsh with the topography surrounding it. When we first suggested a water play area, the city was fine with it, except they said, we're not going to use any kind of filtration system. We can't maintain it. There's just no way. We don't have the personnel or the facilities. So we really, thought a water play area was the right thing to do there, and we started thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do with all that water? We don't want to just dump it back into the stormwater system. And you can see it's quite a bit of water. It's about, over 100,000 gallons of water per week. So we started talking with our ecologist about what we could do with this water, and with our irrigation people and with the soil scientists. And one of the things that was immediately obvious is that in order to maintain the health of the marsh, we needed to have water circulating through that area. And the only way to get water to circulate was to have water kind of pumped into it. So all of this water is actually piped directly to the backside of the marsh, goes through a hard pipe, is released, and basically pushes water through. But that wasn't enough. This raises the level, so we also created a weir, so water, when it reaches a particular level, goes over and helps to aerate the water. So there's water, as long as the water play area is going, water is constantly moving through that marsh and preventing any kind of stagnation. But that wasn't enough. So what happens with the water? Well, in the marsh, there have to be overflow areas during storm events, so those basically get taken to an irrigation tank. So we had about 135,000 gallon irrigation tank, which is what it takes to water the park during a week. So now we're starting to see some infrastructure, and then we also collected all the water that we could subsurface. So these are subsurface systems off of this recreation field, off of the central lawn, and those are all diverted either into the stormwater tank, or they go into the marsh to help those areas that are tougher to get at. And then what happens is you have irrigation then, of course, being distributed from the tank. So effectively, we take the water from the water play area, we push it through the marsh so that it's used, and then we use it in irrigation, and then everything that irrigation runs off into goes back into the water tank. So it's this system that basically recycles itself. So would I prefer not to have any potable water in the system? Yes, but on the other hand, we're using it at least 3 times and more as it gets recycled through. So this is one of the nodes of the marsh area looking up, and the ecologies on the slopes are meant to respond to those local conditions. This is fairly recent. Actually, I was here last week. And then that's looking across, and you can start to see some of the development that's happening for the games. So pretty soon, Don River will be the centerpiece of that whole complex, which is really exciting since it's only taken 7 years to get here. So that's it. Thank you very much.
We can open it up for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll do all the rest of the questions over drinks and snacks, I guess. So if there's anybody who has any questions.
Thank you for that really amazing talk. I have a part A and part B question, if Ted will permit me. The first question, one of the things I've always really appreciated about the work in your office is your attention to planting. And I wonder whether you think about the effects of planting on hydrology as you're working out these schemes. And then the second half of the question is whether the office ever has the opportunity after construction to be able to measure performance and to collect data over time about the efficacy of the places in managing water.
The first about, which was about planting, is yes, we think about that all the time. You know, Michael is a tremendous plantsman, and we have come to understand that, you know, you really have to match plants to the absolute condition of slope, soil type, aspect, how it's working to contribute to cleanse water, et cetera. So yes, that's something that we actually have matured. I think we're the maturest we've ever been about that, and continue to go. In fact, in Don River, the soils were coming in at a much higher pH than the tests showed that they would. And so we went into research mode and basically learned a lot about soil pH, which is the pHs that are described in books are actually from native conditions, and that you actually find that in nurseries where you get your plants, the soils are much different. So we took soil samples from the nurseries. We talked with anybody that would talk with us about pH. We changed some aspects of the planting palette, but other things stayed just as they were because people advised us that they would be able to adapt. And then, Jane, what was your second question? Oh, performance. Some we do. So, for instance, for the American Society of Landscape Architects Green Roof, there's a huge amount of data that they are collecting themselves. We have participated in the Landscape Architecture Foundation, which, if you don't know that organization, look them up, because they basically take projects and will assign students to and professors to basically look at your projects and figure out what the performance is. So we've done that, I think, for 2 projects so far. But it's a tough thing to do. You know, it's basically on your dime, and you've got to bring in other consultants in order to get real data. But the Landscape Performance Series from the Landscape Architecture Foundation is quite different than the Sustainable Sites work, which is really about certifying. Sustainable Sites is about certifying, but the Landscape Architecture Foundation is really performance-based. So you may have hoped that you cut down on drainage by 75%, off-site drainage by 75%, and if you did 60%, you still did 60% better than you did. So it's not punitive. So there are ways.
I was wondering, are you able to use mainly native plantings, or are you, because of what you're trying to do, forced to use stuff that isn't native?
Forced by whom?
Forced by the, in order to sustain the drainage that you're looking for.
No, you mean, are we forced to use native plants?
No. Are you, because of the nature of what you're doing, is it forcing you to not use native plants? You're striving to use native plants.
We have always tried to use native plants, and we almost exclusively use native plants. So we do a lot of research about that. It's important to us. Things do better, right? They just do better.
Well, they should. It's just that we've introduced so many things that aren't good.
For Don River, we really got, we were really challenged by things. So all the agencies that we were working with were absolutely committed to natives. We were too. We wanted to introduce a few non-natives, but only did one species, I think.
I have it. Thanks. Sorry, I can't stand too long. I'm holding a lot of stuff right here, so I'm going to ask you when I sit down. Thank you, Laura, for showing us so many beautiful projects. And we noticed that all the parks you guys are working very specific with the site, and it looks really, really natural look. But after you're showing us the drawing, we know you have to work with engineers and a lot of infrastructure. Just aside for the design, I was wondering, how have you been through the learning curve of teaching the clients or showing them this is the right way to go? And another thing, we have a lot of infrastructure like water tank or something. I understand that that's kind of costly. How do you manage that, and how do you
the cost you said?
Yeah, the cost was the infrastructure. How do you negotiate with the client, and how you make them know this is the good thing to do in the long run? Thanks.
Well, first of all, when people hire us, they kind of know what the package is that they're getting. So we're not going to create the Tuileries anywhere. Well, maybe someplace or another. But so generally, we start these discussions early on with the client, and we're fortunate enough to be the prime on most of our jobs. About 20% of our jobs are with architects, and the rest are work that we pursue on our own. And we hire, like for Brooklyn Bridge, we had 15 different consultants, and some of them are really narrow slices, of, $25,000, and others are, millions of dollars in fees. And we just, over the years, have learned and had the ability to work with people that are like-minded. So if you're not, we don't tend to work with you to begin with. But it's very exciting because we're quite interested in the technology. Technology comes into our work from the very beginning in schematic design and conceptual design, because if an idea can't work, then it's not really a very good idea. And so we're very diligent about that. And in terms of cost, no one should think that we don't have very stringent budgets. In fact, Lake Whitney with Stephen Hall cost $5 a square foot to make. It was just dirt cheap, so to speak. So we're very conscientious about that. Our clients are a lot of public agencies. They don't have open checkbooks, so it's this constant checks and balance, and our consultants checking things. But one thing I wanted to follow up with is that, making landscapes is really tough because people think that you're making nature, and you're not. There's no way to make nature. I can't tell you how raw landscape projects are when they get built. Their first day that they're open to the public is their worst day, because they're so young, they haven't developed, the soils aren't even doing the thing they need to do. And so really what we try to do is create the best circumstances for nature to take over eventually, because we can't create it. It's just too complex. So you try to take care of each of the systems that's going to contribute to the making of that landscape. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Okay.